Has political correctness gone too far? On May 25th of 2017, I debated along with a friend of mine the issue of whether political correctness has gone too far. Political correctness is defined as the avoidance, often considered taken to extremes, of forms of expression or action that are perceived to exclude, marginalize, or insult groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against. This is the definition that we use for our debate on political correctness. We were arguing on the affirmative, that yes, indeed, it has gone too far. So without further ado, here's the debate.
Number one, and I believe that will be Mike Walsh, in support of this motion. Has it gone too far? We're doing the microphone. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Can everyone hear me? Good? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I just want to thank Thomas for having this debate, and I hope we're in for a very good discussion. All right? First, I want to make it absolutely clear that my side is not against all political correctness. We're against dogmatic political correctness. We're for some very basic political correctness. We just think that the current climate of political correctness has gone too far. No rational person wants to go back to a culture where racism, sexism, and every form of bigotry is openly tolerated and perhaps even encouraged. But what we are for, and what we are committed to, is rationality over sensitivity and facts over feelings. Feelings should never trump facts. We should never have to deny what is factually correct, what is logical, and what is supported by evidence because it may hurt someone's feelings. When political correctness goes too far, it forces you to deny facts in the name of not offending certain people. It also creates a climate where everyone is forced to walk on eggshells because everyone's terrified of offending everyone else. And this prevents rational discourse, and it creates an outrage and victimhood culture that encourages people to be as offended as much as possible so that they can complain and play the victim and oftentimes get what they want as a result of that. That's what we're mainly against. So, has political correctness gone too far? Absolutely. Here are just a couple examples I can give you out of perhaps 100. Number one, when political correctness goes too far, it prevents you from having rational dialogue on topics considered sensitive, and almost every topic becomes sensitive. For example, Islam. Consider the sexism and the mistreatment of women inside Muslim-majority countries. Consider the unbelievable levels of homophobia inside Muslim-majority countries. Consider the fact that in 13 Muslim-majority countries, you get the death penalty if you leave Islam and want to convert to another religion or no religion. Every liberal knows that there needs to be liberal reform in the Muslim-majority countries. But the moment anybody criticizes anything about Islam or the behavior of Muslims regarding these things, you are immediately labeled a racist, a bigot, and an Islamophobe. And what it does is it shuts down all conversation. So much so that most liberals are terrified of critiquing anything about Islam or even asking tough questions. This allows the worst behaviors in those countries and those cultures to persist year after year. We cannot have rational conversation on the problems in Islam or things like it, like racism, if everyone is so terrified of being accused of being a racist for saying anything critical about it. Number two, when political correctness goes too far, it stifles intellectual and emotional development. Consider, for example, the proliferation of safe space culture on college campuses. Brown University recently had a debate over campus sexual assault, and it was organized. And women on the campus feared that such a dialogue would trigger them, and under the university's guide were given a safe space room to retreat to, equipped with, quote, cookies, coloring books, bubbles, Play-Doh, calming music, pillows, blankets, and a video of frolicking puppies, as reported by the New York Times. Imagine a world where you can change you can have all the views you disagree with never presented to you. This is what many of our modern day universities look like. College is supposed to be a time when your ideas are challenged, when you're forced to think critically and develop arguments for your point of view, and to hear different points of view and debate them, as we're doing right now. The point is not that we should get rid of all safe spaces. The point is that this ultra-infantilization of adults is going too far. And that people who get used to this are never going to be able to survive emotionally in the real world, and they're never going to be able to develop real critical thinking skills to think logically because they're afraid of debating. Number 3, when political correctness goes too far, it descends into absurdity. Consider microaggressions, which is the casual degradation of any marginalized group. Nowadays, assuming someone's gender is considered a microaggression, calling someone he, she, him, or her. Some are arguing that we should ask someone's gender each time we speak to them. The University of California has told its faculty members to say things like, America is the land of opportunity. Everyone can succeed in the society if they work hard enough. Those are microaggressions. They've been instructed not to say them. Number 4, outrage culture, when people are determined to be angry and actively seek out things to be angry about. Steve Martin recently tweeted about Carrie Fisher. He said, quote, "When I was a young man, Carrie Fisher was the most beautiful creature I'd ever seen. She turned out to be witty and bright as well." He was accused of being sexist. He deleted his tweet. He apologized. This is the fascistic policing of policy right here. Very, very lastly, the question is, when has PC become ridiculous? I'm arguing that it's happening right now, and it's only getting worse unless we wake up. We have to be able to question things. We have to stop overreacting. We have to stop assuming the worst interpretations of people that we agree with. So I urge you to vote for the motion. Thank you.
Great. Hi guys. Thank you for coming out. I guess I'll just get started. So, a 2015 Rasmussen report found that 71% of Americans think that political correctness is a serious problem in this country. The conservative American Thinker magazine said that political correct posturing while protecting Islam and Muslims puts Americans in physical danger. And Donald Trump said that political correctness is killing our country. So those are some harsh words, but what are we really talking about when we're talking about political correctness? When most people talk about political correctness, they're using it as a pejorative. They're saying, this has gone too far. This is something that we don't want. They're saying that you're essentially, when you call someone saying, when you say that someone is saying something politically correct, they're saying that they're lying, basically, for their own political point of view. But that's not really what political correctness is. Tom has told us our definition of political correctness. It's avoiding terms that could be perceived as harmful or insensitive to minorities or people who've been discriminated against. So I urge you to think about that when you think about political correctness. So I'm going to lay out. So basically, when we talk about political correctness, it's about equality and respect. I'm going to lay out several arguments for political correctness. First, politically correct language is more accurate and more nuanced than politically incorrect language. For example, if you talk about Islam, if you talk about the problems in Islam, rather than saying, oh, Islam has this problem, maybe you should say, well, Buddhism has this problem, because Sufism might not have that problem. So if you look at all the Muslims in the world, billions of people, you really can't say, Islam, these people have this problem. That's just inaccurate. Second, society needs social norms. When you talk to someone else, there are basic things that you adhere to. You call them by the name that they prefer you to call them by. You talk to them with respect. You don't say things that you know that they will find incendiary and offensive. So political correctness is really about just talking to someone else the way you would like to be talked to. Third, language matters, and changing our language to be more egalitarian, tolerant, and open can help us create a more egalitarian society. For example, one thing that one thing that a lot of people point as being ridiculous in political correctness is the Washington Redskins. A lot of people say there's nothing wrong with the team's name, that it's a victimless crime, that no one is really being hurt by this. But in fact, Redskins is a racial slur. And studies have found that when people are exposed to this sort of language, they adhere more closely to racial stereotypes. Native American people, when, as a result of these sorts of mascots, have lower self-esteem, lower community engagement, that sort of thing. And really, so as they said, they agreed that political correctness, that some political correctness is what we need, that we don't want to talk that we don't want to go back to the past where people are using racial slurs or saying whatever they want and all over the place. But the thing is about political correctness is it is a pejorative. So when you think about this, you only think about the ridiculous things that they were talking about the brown safe spaces for their the lecture on women or that sort of thing, or that. But really, those are the things that get talked about a lot in the media, and it's not really an issue on the whole. For the most part, when we look at political correctness, we should be looking at how we use it in everyday language in our society today. We're talking about being nice to people, being respectful of their culture, being respectful of their ideas. Thank you.
So I hope I can encourage more to have, on all sides, to have these conversations. I think they're very productive. As it says in my bio, I'm a veteran and a science advocate. Science in the military has been my two lifelong passions. Language and culture became one in my late teens. So as a result of this, I've been all over the world across spanning about 4 continents, dozens of countries, and a good number of languages. And I can tell you with a lot of certainty that there are better and worse ways to resolve moral differences. So most people who join movements like Antifa decide that the best way to oppose Milo Yiannopoulos is to turn Berkeley into a 1980s Kurt Russell movie. These people would be wise to listen to more veterans of counter-extremism and counterinsurgency, as well as data on moral psychology and the science behind that. So there are far better ways to operate than certain versions of political correctness. One of the most soul-crushing things I saw when I returned from the war zone was how deeply divided and broken this country was, how Americans would not talk to Americans. And we're in Afghanistan. Our team could sit down and have tea with Taliban warlords and tribal elders. The people in this country won't even talk to their neighbors. This kind of moral political tribalism is utterly toxic and hurtful. And some dogmatic forms of political correctness are part of this problem. So I'm going to just briefly lay out what I want to accomplish tonight. I want to find areas where we can all agree, including a lot of the, I think, good points they made. I think there's a lot of truth on both sides here. I think we should acknowledge some of the underlying concerns behind the benign forms of political correctness, such as the marginalized, the need to check our biases, and things like that, and try to courageously and honestly fight for those things, but in a way that doesn't run into the more dogmatic, extreme forms of PC. And we should also have a lexicon to distinguish between the two, and to try to equip people with the tools to have these conversations. So we'll give a few quick examples, real-world examples that I would like to explore more during the talk, that can show and exemplify why an approach that's primarily informed by science, skepticism, and genuine empathy is just far better than an approach informed primarily by ideology and political correctness. You can look at a number of issues from police reform, justice reform, racism, bigotry, hate groups, why people become radicalized and how to fight it, issues like immigration, multiculturalism, Islam. So an entire litany of social justice issues, we tend to see a pattern emerge, which is that political correctness in its current excessive form in some ways stops needed conversation or prevents needed conversation. And this makes us more resistant to the very kind of criticism dialectic that we most need to be exposed to in complex, difficult issues. And in short, it goes against the very spirit of skepticism, Socratic conversation, and against evolution and innovation. So you have to find a way to reconcile these things, what we're both saying. So a quick example I'll be happy to explore and delve into more. Take the issue of police reform and justice movements, and how we understand problems and arrive at answers, and how we save lives, black lives and blue lives both. But I can tell you this, I've never been a cop and I'm not a minority, and I respect the fact that there's certain lived experiences that I'll never be able to relate to. And my role should mostly be to listen with humility when it comes to that issue. However, there are people that will literally tell you that if you're the wrong skin color and the wrong gender, you should not open your mouth. You should just blindly follow the social justice tactics of Antifa, even if they lead people off a cliff. And so take an issue like the issue of police reform. You can have justice movements and retired and active cops have dialogue with local residents and communities and with each other, and find a way to work with social science over ideology, and find a way to have a productive conversation. And this can actually save lives on all sides. We need to find a way to arrive at a system of community policing, community-driven policing, and better policy reform that will save lives across the board and make it better for everybody. But the atmosphere in which we try to have this conversation is utterly toxic, and it is And so ideology and political correctness are driving this discussion rather than science and compassion. And I think this has consequences, and sometimes it even gets people killed, even with the best intentions. And so I just want to wrap up with a couple examples here that we can explore as well. The paradigm that we use on college campuses is Milo versus Antifa. It's an utterly failed paradigm. The solution is to create alternate spaces, alternate exchange spaces, better ways to equip people to humanize each other, talk to each other, and bring this across every campus in America. We can talk about that. This can also be used to fight extremism with something called echo chamber reciprocity, or reciprocal radicalization between Islamic extremism and the far right in Europe. That's another thing we talk about. We talk how the tendency to reflexively call people bigot and Islamophobe can be weaponized against the left. People like Max Blumenthal are called anti-Semite for criticizing Israel or criticizing Eli Wiesel, right? And finally, my goal tonight is when people walk out of here, you want to be a social science warrior in SSW. And that reconciles what we're talking about. Thank you.
To Katherine, arguing against the motion.
What kind of society do you want developing around you? What kind of civilization do you want the history books to mark us down as? And most importantly, what kind of place do you want to hold in that society or that civilization? Don't be fooled. Those are the questions that frame this debate. Who do we want to be, and how do we get there? A society that values humanity, that doesn't live and die imprisoned and beholden to false binaries and constructed myths, or not? If the answer is the former, how do we get there? By not alienating and isolating the already marginalized. By including, by taking the step, however difficult and daunting it may seem, however well-meaning the opposition might be in their assertions, however well-woven the web of justifications for not doing so may be, we get there by taking the tough step to stand up for groups and the people in them. Inclusionary language is certainly a start. Use language that perpetuates exclusion, or worse, hate. You can make a point without that. You can make a point and distinguish yourself without reinforcing that which has destroyed our society up to this point. Respecting identities, whether chosen or not, in the words we use is critical. We can acknowledge that these individuals are seeking solid ground, seeking identity, belonging, and meaning by including who they are in how we speak. That's how we create a society functioning and productive. How do we get there? By not isolating groups and people in them. By not alienating individuals through our language. To include them in your speech, in your actions, in your standards, in your protocols. Too far? You want to know what has gone too far? Demonization and blame. Siloing people with narrow and inaccurate descriptions. Acceptance of a standard that isolates further the least of us. It's extreme and plays into the hands of those who do not want to see a functional society. We have to consciously push back against this. We have to insistently include, uncomfortably invite, and vigorously tolerate. Change our behavior regardless of its discomforts and well-reasoned justifications. Anything less is maintaining, reinforcing, and outright advocating for the superiority of my group at the expense of another. Whether it be a criminal justice system, a legal system, a religious system, a linguistic system, we've carefully crafted and diligently maintained a set of systems to ensure certain groups maintain control and are represented. How we speak and how we act are manifestations of dominance, post-colonial structures, and racial and gender bias. If we value a full democracy, if we value a society moving forward, we have to recognize, accept, and actively support the conclusion that political correctness, on balance, benefits society and has absolutely not gone too far. I'll leave you with this to keep in mind as we proceed into the discussion. The foundation of a fully functioning democracy is full participation. Do we want a democracy grouped and reserved for those who were bequeathed linguistic advantage in the English syntax and role definition superiority manufactured by what? Society? A society engaged and in love with war? Is that the standard we set for ourselves? Is that how we grow and manifest full participation? Is that the foundation of a full democracy? She, brown, poor, Muslim, foreign-born. Think of your own characteristics that perhaps are more easy to hide, but may lie outside of society's fabricated sense of what you should be. And think if you were consistently, systematically excluded from the conversation before it even started. Do we want to live in a society where, in systematic fashion, participation is discouraged and confined to only those we like, we identify with, or heck, have just always been in charge? If your answer is no, and I suspect it is, there's no other option but to vote that no, political correctness has not gone too far.
Start our Crossfire section, which is where I'll ask directed questions to each side, and then they could ask questions back and forth before we turn it over to the audience. So, team one, let me ask you this. Somebody said we must use science and compassion to understand each other, with humility and listen to others. So that sounds like team two's argument. If you're using science and compassion, and team two mentioned that PC is proper in some instances because you need to refine certain terminology, and there's a lot of nuances. For instance, somebody mentioned Muslims, right? So, I mean, again, which Muslims are referring to? Is it Muslims in Bangladesh or another part of the world, say Ethiopia? So again, isn't it better if we live in a society, because the whole premise when I started is that we live in a very complex society, but we want to understand each other better through those nuances.
Yeah.
Particularly.
Sure, I'll be quick here and hand you my microphone. But basically, I actually think we're in agreement there on that basic idea. There's a lot of overlap here. Most people agree that scientific data is important and being skeptical is important. We also understand through multiple lines of research and through intuition that empathy and compassion are very important. We expand our empathy circle, our sphere of moral concern, as people like Peter Singer or Stephen Beaker will talk about. So as we humanize people and we get better and better at this as the centuries go on, we start to see people as human beings. Science also provides a good framework for better understanding problems. We need both of these pillars. And I think that the disagreement and the debate might be the best way to get there. So I argue that we do need the nuance in the lexicon to talk about things like Islam, to recognize that it's a plurality of views, and there is a spectrum of jurisprudence and traditions and ideas, and there's a behavioral spectrum in terms of how closely people follow the doctrines. So we need that conversational nuance to better hone in on the problem. But in order to get there, in order to be able to have those conversations, to be able to dig up that nuance, and to be able to talk about the science, and be able to expand our empathy circle by sitting down with someone you don't agree with. Get someone who's retired, like right now, I'm working with people in the police force and in Black Lives Matter groups. We've got to get people to humanize each other. I think political correctness gone too far. It prevents these things from happening. It makes that more difficult, not less difficult. That's, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, and definitely don't get the impression in your head that we're like anti-Islamic or anything. I use Islam as a religion, but certainly different countries in the Islamic world are different. Saudi Arabia would be a worse example. Turkey would be a better example. But the point is that the moment you criticize anything going on in any part of the Islamic world, the argument usually, the counter-argument to that usually is, well, you're saying all Muslims are this. No, I'm not saying all Muslims are that. Of course not. I'm saying that there is a problem with some Muslims doing certain things in the Islamic world, and that needs to be addressed. It needs to be criticized. We need to have rational conversations on how do we change that? How do we get the more countries that are doing these kinds of things into the 21st century so that, you know, different minorities in those countries and people without power, which is a liberal thing to be for, you know, women to have equal rights, gay people shouldn't be executed. You know, most liberals would agree with that kind of thing. But when you argue, when you criticize countries that do things against that, the immediate response is, oh, you're saying all Muslims are, killing gay people or this or that. That's not the conversation at all. The problem with when PC goes too far is that there isn't this kind of nuance. There's this dogmatic, black and white thinking. If you criticize one group, they interpret it as you're saying that entire group is one particular way. That's not what we're doing at all.
Okay, let's get a rebuttal from Team 2.
Great. Okay, so I agree. We do have a lot in common on the other side. Where I think we disagree is that I don't think I think that the idea that PC has gone too far is very popular right now. People are always talking about these instances that happen on college campuses, but really, is that really what is the most important part of PC? There's always going to be an extreme element of anything that you're looking at. If you look at religions, like if you look at Christianity, you're not going to judge Christianity based on the Westboro Baptist Church. That would be ridiculous. So Christianity on the whole, not the Westboro Baptist Church. So I think we agree on that. But I think that the media has made, especially like right-wing media, Fox News, has made an entire sort of apparatus towards complaining about political correctness. For example, I was recently reading an article in the National Review that was about, there was a Georgetown professor who confronted Richard Spencer, the neo-Nazi, at his gym, and the article basically said that she was infringing upon his rights and that she should have confronted him in the gym, that he had the right to work out wherever he wanted, and that his political views played no role in that. Is that really the society that we want? That your views, that the things that you say, and the things that you stand for? He's the leader of the neo-Nazi movement in America. So I think it's a little bit ridiculous that his views should, especially as he's a leader, should come into play in his life. People have the right to say, no, I don't stand for that, and they have the right to social censure. It's not government censure. You're not saying, oh, we're infringing upon your First Amendment rights. No, I mean, you say something horrible, people have the right to say that's a horrible thing to say, and you should not say it. I'm missing something. Do you want to add?
Sure. I just wanted to, there was a lot said there, but a couple of things popped out to me. One is to take issue with that we can't, or we don't somehow criticize Muslim countries. And I can assure you, even here in New York, my experience is, there's a lot of at least caution around them, and there's an understanding that there are varying, and there's a spectrum of beliefs and structures there in those countries, and some of them are heavily criticized outwardly and very publicly. So I would take issue with this idea that for some reason we can't criticize Muslim countries and that's a problem. I hear a lot of criticism of that. And I'll just add on that, most of the things that we're talking about are offensive. They're offensive. It doesn't matter what you think or who you are. They're offensive. Now, I think part of what they're saying is that we should kind of toughen up our skin and be able to take those things. But they are offensive, and don't forget that. And I come from the South, and I come from a place that thinks drastically different than most people do up here. And I can assure you, the things they say, the terms they use, the way they define people, it's offensive, and it's indicative of a thought pattern. And to me, that's dangerous. And when we talk about going too far, I can assure you it hasn't gone far enough. And we do. When we talk about echo chambers, we live in one here in New York City. The rest of the country, as we've probably all kind of noticed with the election, sees and does a lot different things. And political correctness is a part of that discussion.
Sure. Just address that real quick, and I think you're making some very good points. I was actually born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, and lived in Europe for a couple of years. There's certainly, I think it may be helpful to distinguish between good and bad forms of political correctness. I think I think we simultaneously need to go further when it comes to reducing hurtful language. And I'm nowhere near someone, like my side on this, I don't want this to be confused with someone who espouses Milo Yiannopoulos and his style of things. I do think we need to be cognizant of other people's feelings. For example, when I learned, years and years ago that the word retard was genuinely hurtful, I stopped using it as best I could. I mean, I might occasionally, I consciously decided not to use that word. I think that kind of expanding of our empathy circle and using better language is important. I think there are good ways to get there, and there are areas where more that's needed. I think there's also a bad form, a more toxic, dogmatic, sort of black and white thinking that groups us into tribes, into a binary opposition, my tribe against your tribe, and it closes people off and makes them literally, not yelp, but it makes a lot of people stupid, lowers their verbal cognitive skills, it decreases their empathy for other people, they otherize the other person as the enemy, and this shuts down the part of their brain that can otherwise agree and see what they agree on. So there's a lot of, and most of the country is not that divided. So I think we both need to recognize we do need to improve our language and not hurt people. But to get there, we need more. We need to desegregate the conversation. We need more people talking to each other. We need to bridge gaps. We need someone who lives in suburban housing in suburbia who watches Fox News, a 60-year-old white guy, to sit down and talk to someone who lives in a predominantly black neighborhood in the housing projects. And we need them to have a face-to-face conversation because this country's become enormously segregated, enormously polarized, racially and ideologically. And the only way to bridge that gap is through face-to-face, empathy-based discussion. And PC in its bad form prevents that from happening. And that floods the echo chambers with reciprocal back-and-forth bullshit, which makes it worse and harder to get to where you're saying.
Okay, team 2, I have a question. So we talked about offensiveness. Now, offensiveness, if you look at the underlying factor that drives offensiveness, it's intent, right? There's the intent to make someone feel offended, uncomfortable, so on. And the premise of this debate I mentioned was that we live in a very complex society, changing demographics, we have different norms and so on. So let's say in some parts of the country where certain things are not a slur and it's not offensive, then why should we call them out on it, right? Because once we start going down that road, then don't we have to rename all the buildings that are named after, Confederate generals and so forth, and at the end, we're going to end up with, whitewashing history to some extent.
I think that there, for example, the Confederate renaming, there's been a lot of talk in the news lately. New Orleans recently took down some of its Confederate statues. Charlottesville, there was a big thing. Richard Spencer came, had a bunch of torches to protest them taking down a statue at, I think, Lee. So it's important not to ignore history and say, oh, we're going to ignore it now. But I think that there are ways, without venerating Confederates. If you look at these statues, they were put up by the South after the war, and they were saying, these Confederates are great, we didn't do anything wrong, it was heritage, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Some people genuinely believe that, but the thing is, these are venerating the Confederacy, and really, I think that you could put up a statue or a monument that says, this happened here, it was about this, and you're not venerating Confederates or the South or slavery, or you're not overlooking the racial past that has. And I think in a lot of ways, by trying to say, oh, we should let it pass because it's not offensive in this part or to these people, you just have to look deeper to find out what people are really thinking.
When it comes to the whole Confederate statue thing, I wouldn't personally mind if every Confederate statue was replaced with a statue of Malcolm X. I really wouldn't care all that much. So I definitely think that there's justification for removing the worst actors in American history from the statues. Take the statue down, put it in the Confederate Museum, allow the Confederate sympathizers to be able to pay money to go into that museum. I'm fine with that. But what I am concerned about in the long-term future, given this trend, I mean, it's easy to be against a statue of, Robert E. Lee or someone like that. But, you have anybody who's ever said anything racist at any point in their life, people are saying, well, that statue needs to come down. And what I'm worried about is a movement eating itself. You may be for what's going on now, but you may not understand where this movement is going to be in 50 years. What if in 50 years, eating animals is considered as bad as being a racist or a slave owner? So what if we have a statue of Martin Luther King, and 50 years from now, people say, this guy ate meat, he ate animals, he supported the factory farm industry, let's remove his statue down and replace it with a vegan. That could be the case 50 years from now. Don't think that it couldn't be the case. You have no idea where this movement could be. And so we're going to take every statue down and replace it with the most peaceful, hippie, vegan, who's never harmed anything. I mean, is that what we're going to be in 20, 30, 40, 50 years? I'm just worried about that. I mean, so the question I have to ask is there a line that we draw and say, okay, this is what we tolerate and this is what we don't tolerate, and we never move from that? Or is the thing always going to move down and we include new things? You're a meat eater? Can't have a statue of you. You supported the brutal torture and killing of animals. It's horrible. How do you do that? It's like the Holocaust. So I'm just a little worried about where this thing is going to go. Because imagine if you had a statue made of you right now and you eat meat. Someone says, oh, eat meat, take it down. He's a meat eater. We had a vegan up there. Someone who actually respects sentient beings, not someone who is carelessly supporting the factory farming industry. That could be the case. So we have to think about these things and where they're going to go in the next couple decades.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, you heard it here first. In 50 years, we'll be a society of hippie vegans in a very dystopian society, and all the statues eliminated. So with that being said, let me open it up to the audience. We'll let each side get a question. And before we get to you, I want to emphasize one thing. In the interest of time, I want the questions to be very direct. And I know this is a very passionate topic, so please no rhetorical statements and one question only. And with that being said, I believe Bill had his hand up first, so I will go to your question.
This is directed to the one from Louisiana.
Oh.
You were saying that you can make your point without using slurs and so forth. I think that the political correctness results in some points not being able to be made. For example, basically, if you talk about any form of dysfunctional behavior, the politically correct will accuse you of talking about dysfunctional minorities, say that you're saying coded racism, and shut you down. And what I've read, is that in the red states, in rural areas, the whites are dysfunctional as hell. And when they talk about welfare chiefs, they're talking about their relatives. But the liberals from the coast shut them down, saying that's coded racism. You're not allowed to talk about welfare chiefs. So 40% of the babies in this country of all races are born out of wedlock. It's hardly discussed, because when it is discussed, it's accused of coded racism and shut down. And we are living in a rampantly dysfunctional society where dysfunction cannot be discussed.
Okay, I think if I don't answer your question, stop me. I think I understand what the question was. And I'll just go on some of the specifics that you mentioned, that from what you understand in a lot of these red states, when they talk about welfare, they're talking about their relatives, which I would absolutely agree with, but I would also am absolutely certain that they don't know that. That when they're issuing some type of declaration against whoever is on welfare, whoever that is, they're talking about a specific racial group. I've sat on porches drinking wine and having this exact discussion, and I can assure you they live out in the country, and at no point does it cross their mind that their neighbor might be on WIC, might have food stamps. They're talking about a race. And once again, I know that's uncomfortable. They're talking about a race, and it's a way to once again push that race away. And I understand there's exceptions to everything. I'm sure one time your Pomeran's brother's cousin was really educated and wasn't talking about a race. Across the board, though, it's about a race. It's not about people. It's not about their relatives. It's we hate welfare because it's black women having babies to get a check. And if you think I haven't heard that 100 times over, then I can assure you I've heard it a lot. And that's really the justification.
Okay. Questions for Team 2? I believe you get your hand up. You can introduce yourself and questions to Team 1.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
My question's actually really geared towards both groups, so but I can steer in your direction. Assuming the situation where speech violates political correctness as defined and actually causes emotional pain to a marginalized group of people, do you believe that the PC movement at present ever justifies or claims to justify A, physical violence to suppress that speech, or B, the government's suppression of offensive speech?
Yeah, I'll take that one real quick. We'll get to you if you want. So I think that's a really good question. I do think there are legitimate recognitions of things like microaggressions, and there's legitimate use of safe spaces. I think that the question of violence, it's a really good one I talk a lot about on podcasts. I think that can become easily weaponized by both sides. And if you look at a heat map, an overlay of where all the guns are, and you look at the political spread of this country, you do not want to legitimize the idea that violence is okay against a group you disagree with. And think about, in theory, based on good, go Captain America and punch everyone who thinks a Nazi. When people can't even define who a Nazi is, when they think subscribing to Ben Shapiro's YouTube channel makes you a Nazi, and I'm not even joking, then it becomes a very slippery slope to this kind of binary thinking and tribalism. And then this can become weaponized by the alt-right. And the thing is, a lot of this propaganda, I have a background in psychological warfare through the military. The alt-right, the green frogs, as much as I dislike them, are much smarter than most people on the left when it comes to propaganda, counter-propaganda, and understanding how to weaponize this stuff. This will be used against the left, make no mistake. So I think, and it doesn't mean I'm judging everybody who wants to, punch someone, but I think the thing about speech codes are utterly dangerous. Those can be used to turn out people. They can be used to silence Muslims. They can be used to ban, speech considered subjectively offensive. There's a very dangerous slope there. Do you want who in this room wants Donald Trump and Steve Bannon to have a big hand in regulating the speech codes? Raise your hand. So that's my answer.
Yeah, I agree with him. The thing about free speech, that a disturbingly large number of young people today don't agree with free speech. They want to have the government hinder the speech that they don't like. But the whole point of free speech really is that free speech is designed to protect the speech that you don't want to hear. It's very easy to be for the speech that you do want to hear, but it's for the speech that you don't want to hear. It is obviously painful for a lot of people to hear speech that you don't want to hear. But every single idea offends somebody, and every new idea, liberal ideas were once very offensive to people. The idea that black people should sit at the same table as white people was once a very offensive idea to a lot of white Southerners 50 or 60 years ago. So we can't have this idea that if you're offended by speech, that you have to have the government stop it. Except when it comes to inciting immediate violence or putting up certain private information. Other than those understandable exceptions, you have to be able to tolerate speech of people that you don't like. So we have to have a free speech society. What you do for speech that you don't like is you debate it. You do these kinds of things. You debate it. You don't shout people down. You say, hey, you have a view I disagree with? Here's why you're wrong. X, Y, Z. Here are 3 arguments why you're wrong. That's what you do. You don't shout people down. You don't get the government to stop them from talking. You debate them and you refute them and you make them look stupid. That's what you do.
Okay, question for Team 2. I believe you had your hand up first. By the way, if I don't call on you, I'm not being politically incorrect. I just don't have enough time, so I just call on the very first person that I see. So, sorry.
All right. So, obviously this is for Team 2. I'd love to hear both sides, but if that's not the way it's going to go. So, in the case of Richard Spencer, who obviously is a despicable person, do you think that curtailing his language, changing his speech in some regulatory way, whether it's social or legal or whatever, will actually change his mind or his followers' minds? Does does changing the way that people speak in that manner actually change the ideas behind the speech?
I mean, I don't think anything is going to change Richard Spencer's mind. He's pretty well set. But I mean, in general, I think if you attempt to put a different sort of speech out there, if you put different sort of speech on TV, if you put it in your newspapers, if you change it in your everyday life, I think it does make a difference. I think that if you don't, so for example, like, I think a lot of people don't know the origins of the term gypped. So if someone says, oh, I've been gypped, that means that they've been cheated or whatever, but it comes from gypsies and the Roma people, and they're heavily discriminated against. And I think if you try to avoid those sorts of terms, you're sort of moving people's ideas on maybe what they think about Roma people in general. I think that if you use the pronouns that a transgender person wants you to use, I think it probably humanizes them more than it would if you were using something that they don't want. If you're using the wrong pronoun, you're not treating them with respect. So you're not treating them as you would any other person just because this facet of their identity, you know? So I think it does make a difference. Richard Spencer is probably not going to make a difference in his life, but
Well, I just in response, I think, and we see this, there's the more you hear something, the more normalized it comes, and the more normalized it comes, the more accepted it is. And I think that's something that we have to be cautious about. Do I think that there should be, you mentioned legal versus social, do I think the government should do anything that regulates, him? Absolutely not. Do I think they should regulate or punish people who seek him out? Absolutely not. It's certainly, that's how you get that type of information. You seek it out. I can get a myriad of different types of information, and that's a good thing to have access to. But as far as pushing it out in society and accepting it as something, as the standard, I think that's a dangerous territory.
Okay, I believe we have time for 2 more questions, one for each side. So now it's going to go back to Team 1. Any questions for Team 1? Gentleman with the headphones with glasses.
Yeah, I'm just wondering your basic argument against politically correctness. Your argument against politically correctness is basically that we should embrace empathy, or at least your argument is empathy in science and have a rational discourse. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that is not negotiable, that basically that we hold on to and will not, that's not negotiable, that goes beyond reason and discourse. Right.
Yeah, I'll make this very quick. I think there are certain things, I think people like Michael Shermer talk about this in Moral Arc. We evolve morally, and we start to, there's certain things that become just intolerable and unsociable. So having a bunch of Ku Klux Klan members in hooded robes is not something we need to, engage in modern society in 2017. So short answer, no, not everything's negotiable. I think that the line's just being pushed way too far through very subjective, very tribal kinds of thinking. The bad form of PC, whereas it's supposed to be good kind.
Outright threats of violence shouldn't be tolerated. Like if your whole platform is let's kill group X, we shouldn't have to tolerate that because that's not a logical argument. That's not saying, here's a point of view that you should respect. So things like that I wouldn't have any tolerance for. Or outright racism, and racism defined as thinking one race is superior to another or discriminating against a race merely because they're of a different race, stuff like that. But simply not being a liberal doesn't make you a racist. So I have a little bit more of a strict definition of racism than what a lot of people have today. But things like that, I wouldn't tolerate.
Okay, one more question directed to Group 2.
Yes, I've seen a lot of protests as far as what Trump said being interpreted as being sexist and a lot of activism concerning that and other things that people on the right say as far as Muslims and women. Honestly, though, I see much more, I guess you would say, hate speech or negative speech coming from, for instance, gangster rap, where, for instance, forgive my language, it's very common practice to refer to women as bitches and hoes. And that's really disturbing to me, because to me, it seems obvious that affects our young people and our population much more than even our president, because this is something people are listening to as kids. I myself actually growing up, and you're having this fed into your head constantly, and it's something I take issue with, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I agree. I think absolutely it hasn't gone too far. Why do we let kids listen to that? Political correctness and expecting inclusion and respectful language hasn't gone far enough. And I think that's a perfect example. Exposing kids to that, especially, exposing all kids to that's really shameful. And that's where I think we need to be a little bit more aware. And we need to think about our language a little bit harder.
And what I was saying was activism too was a big part of it, because I see a lot of protests of politicians and newscasters, but I don't see any protests of rappers and what they're saying.
I think that's true. There aren't very many people who are saying that the language in some of these songs is problematic. I think that's because people look at it differently as sort of an art form, and perhaps they shouldn't. There's a...
No.
All right. Okay. There's definitely some rap that is art, but okay.
No, bitch and hoe, that's what I'm talking about. That's a common term.
It is, and it is problematic. And I think that there are a lot of rappers who, people don't care about it. They probably should care about it. They should stop buying songs that have that sort of language in it if they disagree with it. I think for a lot of rappers, though, there has been some movement. There's less homophobia in rap now than there was in the past. Not much less, but some. I don't know. I don't listen to that much rap, but it is.
I just to say that, if we're talking about offensive things in artwork or not artwork, whatever you want to think it is, that's been happening for centuries. That's not something new just now because we have activism or all this. And I also feel like people are fairly vocal about not letting their kids listen to that, and how upsetting it is that's broadcast. And they do have some regulatory, that was a big deal, like back in, 89 or something, 91 something, where to put the stamp on there for language or whatnot. So, and I'm not saying that fixes everything, but there are some things done, and I hear a lot of upsetness about that language for me personally, and I don't listen to it, and I don't want to be a part of it.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to the closing statements, starting with Team 2. And each side will have 3 minutes to present their final statements.
All right, so I think we've come to a conclusion. We agree on a lot of things, just about how far things have gone. I would definitely argue that there is a right-wing cottage industry that goes into saying that, look at all these horrible politically correct things that are going on. It's destroying the discourse, whatnot. So obviously there are some excesses. If you look at what happened in Berkeley or the violent protests that happened over some speakers, yes, that is definitely a problem. Is that what politically correct speech is on the whole for most people in their everyday lives? No. Is that what we should judge politically correct speech on, and whether we should have political correctness? No. We should really look at how people use politically correct speech in their lives. How does it affect them every day? And when we look at that, we find that it increases tolerance, it increases openness, it increases the accuracy of our statements. We can talk about things with greater nuance. And so I think that we should look at political correctness and say, yes, it is on the whole beneficial to society. Now, they were talking about bad political correctness. Yes, there is, as I was saying, the Berkeley speeches and whatnot. Now, I think that that is really a problem with the discourse as a whole in our society. People have a problem listening to things that they don't like. But there are ways to say to someone that their speech is inappropriate without being offensive, without saying you're a horrible bigot or a racist. You could say, hey, listen, that thing you said, that was a little bit problematic, and here's why. And maybe you should substitute this sort of speech instead. I've done that plenty of times. It's happened to me too. It's hard to keep up with the terms. I understand. But that doesn't mean that politically correct speech is not beneficial on the whole for society. Thank you.
I hope this has been a very entertaining debate. So let me just go into a couple of things. Yeah, I mean, we're trying to stake out a middle ground position here. I mean, the fact of the matter is that nuance is hard and black and white thinking is easy. And I fear that most people will not be able to speak about these kinds of like really complex issues rationally without just going into the dogmatic thinking on either side. So it's very difficult. This is a really big challenge for humanity going forward. The other side said we should be respectful of other people's culture. I agree with that, but not to the point where you're not ever criticizing the other culture. We have to be able to criticize our culture, subcultures within our culture, and other cultures around the world. I don't like this idea that if you're American, you can't criticize another culture simply because you're an American. Or that if you're a male, you can't criticize anything going on in feminism. Or that if you're white, you shouldn't be able to criticize anything going on in the black community. I mean, that kind of thinking allows the most ridiculous ideas in those subcultures to go uncritical. Because a lot of times people in those cultures are afraid to criticize things too. For example, a lot of Muslims are afraid to criticize the more dangerous aspect of the Islamic religion, the things that go on inside their culture, because they're afraid that the conservatives say, hey, if you're criticizing us, you're not a real Muslim. And the PC Muslims say, hey, you're a neocon, you're a right-wing bigot, you know? And so it prevents all criticism from going on. So that's problematic. We're for inclusivity. We're for the inclusivity of different ideas also as well. Not that you have to agree with all the ideas, but that different ideas should be able to have a spot on the table. We have to have that. And the question was asked, what kind of society do you want to live by? Well, not one where you're labeled a racist for criticizing a culture that treats women like second-class citizens or that executes gay people. If you want to live in that society, that's not a society I want to be in. I want to live in a society that you have the ability to criticize those kinds of cultures. All right, so it may come as a surprise, but we're both liberals. What we're trying to do is save liberalism in a sense from itself, because the ridiculous of PC culture today gives the far right legitimate arguments against liberals, and it turns people away from liberalism. They'll say things like, look at what liberalism leads to, and they'll point out to the most absurd thing in liberalism, and they'll have a point, in a way. We liberals need to actually stop this tribalistic thinking. We need to stop this phony virtue signaling, where the idea is to prove to one another how liberal you are by accusing everyone else who doesn't hold the most liberal view on every single issue as a sexist, a racist, or a bigot. We need to actually engage and hold views that differ from us. And we need to listen to other people, because they may have a good point or two. When political correctness goes too far, it becomes the fascism that it claims to be against. So I urge you to vote for the motion. Thank you.
When we first opened the debate, I started with a question. Who do we want to be, and how do we get there? I talked about identities, those of others, and those of ourselves. I continued on referencing the critical need in democracy for participation. And we outlined why uninclusive language and thoughts limit that participation. Are we arguing that political correctness has never and will never be used erroneously or with nefarious intention? No. But the need for inclusive language and behavior far outweighs the need to limit, confine, and exclude. Without conscious effort, we as humans develop restrictive groups where your birth, color, socioeconomic class, religion, sexual identity, or other drive your thoughts, actions, language, and how people perceive you. You can't limit ideas just because you don't like them, you might say. Don't go so fast. Many of the perpetuated exclusionary ideas and words would actually benefit me personally. So to say that we like them or don't like them is totally missing the point. I find exclusive language and thoughts reprehensible as a stakeholder in civilization. As someone thoughtful about and invested in sustainability and harmony of society. Yes, there is a line that can be crossed, a clear one. I've regrettably crossed it before myself, but I don't subscribe to the doctrine of ambiguity or the arbitrary. I don't justify it with some archaic rationalization or a chaotic and inconclusive statistical narrative. We can be loving, accepting, and inclusive and still be defiant in the face of what we all know is exclusion. To what we all know perpetuates intolerance, both explicitly and implicitly. To what we all know widens the divide. Community is what sustains most people. And yes, we have a family, we have a group of friends, nothing wrong with that. But if we seek progress, if we seek harmony, if we seek to diminish the attraction of crazy ideology and violent expression, we better start thinking in terms of a global community and make sure that all feel welcome in that community. As we close, I would like to draw attention to the point I want you to remember. I want you to think about this. Insistently include, uncomfortably invite, and vigorously tolerate. Political correctness is a call to action, to change behavior and shift thought patterns. It's a correction, like a market, like an unhedged and thoughtless risk we've taken with our words and thoughts. Correction is needed, and they can sometimes be painful and go against our protectionist instincts and irritate our egos. But we have to take the step forward. By taking the step, as awkward, as sensitive as it may be, to make the community, to connect through our language and our actions. In light of this call to action, we have to recognize, accept, and actively support the conclusion that political correctness, on balance, benefits society and has not gone too far. Thanks.
All right, good. So actually, I think you all made some really good points, and I want to get to a place in our society where we have it. We have political correctness on balance, where it can become about inclusivity and expanding empathy. I actually want to be at the place you're describing. The problem, I think, is that not enough people on the left at this point in time are calling this out. And this is not unique to the left. This is a problem of political tribalism. We see it on the right as well. And there's a special brand of dogmatic political correctness on the right that is absolutely repulsive and stifles free thinking. This is not unique to any one side. It takes different forms. So the argument is that both sides, at least in their tribal form, this dogmatic left versus right binary thinking, each side tends to harbor extremists within their own community. And the way to root out that extremism, the way to root out some of these excessive versions of PC, or some of the rampant indoctrination and radical forms of intersectionality, not to say all intersectionality is bad, but the dogmatic forms. This indoctrination is an example. The left needs to be more vocal in calling this out, just like the right does, in terms of their extremism. Until this happens, I say you should vote for our side. I'll make an informal bargaining. I think the things you're saying are exceptional and good. I don't think most people, not enough people on the left are saying that. If more people on the left start speaking out in this manner, I will change my mind, and I will actually agree, and I'll sit on this side. I want to be there. I want to say that we have a balanced form of political correctness. At this moment, I encourage you to vote for our side. And encourage more people on the left to speak out and have these conversations. So I'll close this with final remarks. I think there's something inherently beautiful about evolution, bottom-up evolution, adaptation, refinement, the ability to learn from mistakes, the ability to adapt and grow. We see it in nature with self-organized complexity in biological systems. We see it in social innovation, technological innovation, mixed martial arts as an example. Things we have to be able to learn and adapt best practices and make mistakes. That is important in our conversations, and that is currently being crippled right now, stifled by toxic forms of PC. One thing I want to make, a quick point I want to make is that a refusal to talk about hard, uncomfortable issues, it enables a toxic atmosphere of echo chambers of extremism. I tell you, someone who's done this kind of different types of counterinsurgency in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and indirectly and by other means, you are not going to stop the most extreme people from talking. I promise you, you're not going to stop them. You're going to make the problem worse if you don't allow more people to have sensible discussions. And the final comment I want to make is that we ultimately can do better. I think the real axis here is about human dignity and scientific thinking and compassion versus things that oppose that. So one of my favorite movies was The Never-Ending Story. Just like humanity was killing off Fantasia through the decline of books, through the decline of hopes and dreams and aspirations, we need to start dreaming again. We should aspire to build a bridge between science, skepticism, and social justice and sail for new horizons. Thank you.